The cracked earth beneath my boots seemed to scream for water. 3 years. 3 years since Rain decided to abandon us here in Dust Creek, Kansas. My name is Edward, and this parched land was all that remained of my father's legacy, everything I might leave for my son, Billy. Hope was a rare coin, spent down to the last crumb. It was in this desert of despair that he appeared. A salesman. Didn't announce anything, just materialized on the dusty road, a figure too thin, wearing a worn gray suit that clashed violently with the sun beating down like a hammer. In his hands, he held a burlap sack, unmarked, heavy. He offered no smile, just a piercing gaze, like he saw the ruin living in my soul. The seeds, he said, were miraculous. They'd grow where nothing else would, withstand the merciless sun. The price? Next to nothing. A pittance, insulting really, but one eye, in my imminent ruin, grabbed like a drowning man clutches rotten driftwood. As soon as he vanished into the shimmering dust on the horizon, I felt the first chill. Not relief. The icy weight of a pact made in haste, in blindness. I planted the seeds the next day, aware of Martha's distrustful gaze, my wife. Her eyes, once full of the light from our prosperous farm, now reflected only weary worry. The chosen spot was a small hollow behind the empty barn, where shade was slightly kinder. Digging was like piercing dry leather. I buried those strange seeds, small and black like dead insect eyes, with a mix of renewed hope and a deep, visceral dread. What happened next happened fast. Too fast. In a week, dark green, almost black shoots broke through the arid crust. In 2, they were robust plants, with thick, knotted stems resembling tendons under skin. The leaves were broad, a deep, dull green, with throbbing purple veins that seemed to hold something thicker than sap. They were ugly, monstrous in their obscene vitality, brutally contrasting the dead brown surrounding them. The flowers bloomed like tumors, large, fleshy petals of a red so intense it hurt the eyes, like dried blood crusted under the sun. They held no fragrance, only emitted a terrible odor, sweet and putrid at once, like rotting fruit mixed with graveyard dirt. The smell permeates the house even now, with all windows shut. Martha coughed. Billy covered his nose with his shirt. I fought not to retch. Anxiety for the promised fruit turned to dread. When the first fruits appeared, any shred of hope died. They were wrong. Misshapen lumps, the size of small cantaloupes, but a color defying nature. A deep, almost black purple, with vibrant red splotches that seemed to bleed beneath the thin, translucent rind. To the touch, they weren't smooth, but rough, like aged, desiccated skin. A texture that made the hand recoil instinctively. The day came for the first harvest attempt. I called Hank, my last remaining farmhand, a simple man from Tulsa who knew dirt like few others. His hoe struck the thick stem of a plant near the field's edge. The sound wasn't of cut wood. It was a wet snap, followed by a gush of dark, thick fluid from the wound. It wasn't sap. It was black as crude oil, viscous like hot molasses, and smelled 100 times worse than the flowers. A stench of death and rusted metal that flooded the lungs like liquid. Hank screamed. Not a cry of pain, but of absolute terror. The black fluid hit his arm, his shirt. He looked at his arm, then at me, his eyes impossibly wide, veins in his neck standing out like ropes. He began to shake, a convulsive tremor, then fell to his knees, clawing the dry earth with broken nails. "No," he moaned, "don't take me. Get them off me, the eyes, the eyes." He saw things. Things that weren't there. Things that made cold sweat trickle down my spine. I dragged Hank away from that cursed field, his body writhing in spasms, eyes rolled back showing only the whites stained red. I took him to the house, for Martha to tend. She tried to clean the black fluid, which clung to the skin like tar. The next day, Hank was calm. too calm and cold. A coldness radiating from him even under the blazing sun. His skin, where the fluid touched, was parched, cracked like the earth he knew so well. And his eyes had lost their shine, grown dull like old seeds. He didn't speak, just stared at the field, with a mute, terrifying longing. Fear spread faster than the sickness, than the visions. No one else in the county would come near my land. The plants, however, didn't stop. They grew. The purple fruit swelled, pulsing faintly under the translucent rind. Sometimes at night, I swore I heard a whisper coming from the hollow, a low, liquid sound, like roots sucking at something deep. Martha wouldn't look me in the eye anymore. Billy, my 8-year-old boy, lived scared, clinging to his mother's skirts. I knew what had to be done. I had to destroy that curse before it destroyed everything. Before it reached my house. My son. I decided to burn the field. Gasoline, old tires, anything that could make a purifying hellfire. I prepared everything in the dead of night, my heart drumming like a war drum in my chest. The smell of fuel mixed with the sickly sweet rot of the plants, creating a nauseating haze. That's when I heard the scream. A high-pitched, childish shriek tearing through the night. Billy. I ran like a madman, the torch in my hand trembling, lighting desperate steps. I found him at the edge of the cursed field. Fallen. A large leaf, with throbbing purple veins, touched his bare leg. He wept, sobbing, pointing at the field with a trembling finger. Daddy, the people, they're trapped in the ground. They're crying. And you, out there listening to my voice right now, may be comfortable, safe. But I feel I must tell you directly, if one day in your life you find plants like this, with dark green leaves and purple veins, with purple and black fruits that look like meat, run. Don't touch. Not even close. Because what they show, what they do, is far worse than any horror story. It's an evil that clings, that gets inside, that shows the true horror the earth can hide. I broke then. The scream that tore from my throat wasn't human. I threw the torch onto the gasoline-soaked field. The fire exploded with a roar, a golden, furious beast swallowing the monstrous plants. The heat was intense, oppressive, and the sounds, God, the sounds. It wasn't just the crackle of flames. It was like 1,000 voices whispering, screaming in agony within the fire. A chorus of pain and terror echoing inside my skull. The purple fruits burst like balloons filled with old blood, gushing that black fluid which boiled and hissed, releasing vapors that twisted the air, forming fleeting, hideous shapes in the smoke. Shapes of distorted people, trying to escape, being dragged back into the burning soil. I saw Hank there, or something wearing his shape, eyes like dull seeds fixed on me, mouth open in a silent scream. The fire consumed everything. Left only black ash and acrid smoke that hung over Dust Creek for days, like a shroud of mourning. We thought it was over. We were wrong. Hank died 3 days later. Not from burns or terror. His skin simply desiccated completely, becoming brittle as sun-baked clay. He crumbled, literally, into a pile of earthy dust and bone fragments resembling petrified roots. The doctor from Springfield, baffled, couldn't explain. Said it was something never seen. Something impossible. Billy didn't touch the black fluid. Only the leaf. But since that night, he's had a fever. A low, persistent fever no medicine breaks. His skin is getting drier, rougher. He dreams. Terrible dreams. Wakes up screaming about roots growing inside him, about voices whispering from the dirt under his bed. Martha barely sleeps, watching him, her sunken eyes devoured by fear and exhaustion. And me, I touch the plants dragging Hank. I breathe the poisonous smoke. I feel a deep itch in the palms of my hands. An itch that comes from within, like something tiny is moving under the skin. I look at the scorched earth, the black ashes, and I swear I see, in the darkest corners, tiny, sinister sprouts, and almost black-green, breaking the surface. They're coming back, growing slow, but growing. The land here is infected. The pact, I realized too late, wasn't just for the seeds. It was for the land, for my soul. And the final price is being paid now, in dust, in fever, in visions that won't stop. The salesman didn't bring a miracle. He brought a living, thirsty curse, and it sank deep roots. Not just in the land, in us. And the worst, the true horror that freezes the blood in your veins, is knowing that those black seeds, tiny like dead insect eyes, must have been scattered by the hot wind blowing from Dust Creek, carried to other places, other dry lands, other despairs. The harvest of terror has barely begun, and I just hope the fire inside me, when the itch wins and the land calls me to its final embrace, will be hot enough to purge at least some of this evil. But I doubt it. Oh, how I doubt it. The land here remembers, and it never forgives, never forgets, and it is always, always hungry. The smell of wet earth and something deeper, something like rotten teeth in a dark mouth, hit me first when the well's capstone gave way. My name is Edward, and this is the confession of how I doomed my family. If you're hearing this now, I urge you to check if all the doors where you are locked. Because some things, once awakened, aren't content to stay hidden in the dark of a forgotten well. It started with the drought. A cruel drought that turned our property near Jericho Falls into a cracked tapestry of barren soil. The pasture died, the cattle lowed with a thirst that echoed in the hollow, and the creek that sustained us had become just a bed of dry stones and dust. It was Luke, my 15-year-old son, who stumbled on the stone behind the old chicken coop. A stone that didn't belong, too smooth, too cold even under the searing February sun. It took a full day of sweaty work, with rusted crowbars groaning against the weight, to shift it. When it finally yielded, the air that rushed from the hole wasn't just damp. It was tainted, heavy, laden with the odor of ancient things rotting in lightless places. A smell that clung to the back of the throat and pulled downward. The well was an abyss. The flashlight we dropped vanished without ever hitting bottom, swallowed by a darkness that felt solid. My wife went pale, recalling stories from her grandfather, tales about a well that granted wishes at a terrible cost, paid in a currency no one wanted to name. I ignored the warnings. The need for water was a snarling beast inside me, stronger than any legend, and was the first to whisper a wish into that abyss as the sun set, staining the sky a sickly purple. She wished for rain. The rain came that very night, but it brought no relief. It brought locusts, millions of them, a black, chittering army that blotted out the sky, thudding against the windows and roof with a deafening impact, like stones hurled by furious hands. The drone was a cacophony of pain, a high-pitched keen that penetrated bone. By dawn, the ground was carpeted in a thick, pulsating layer of black bodies and broken wings, exuding a sickly sweet stench of premature decay. Luke, driven by a mix of teenage fascination and pragmatic desperation, wished for money to fix our dying tractor. The next morning, a leather satchel, old and soaked, lay in the middle of the abandoned coop. Inside, ancient bills, moldy, stuck together with a dark, sticky substance that smelled of old blood and rusted metal. They were Confederate bills, stained with rust-brown patches, faces of men in long-forgotten military uniforms. Real money, yes, but touching it sent a wave of nausea and a sudden cold creeping up the arms. The money seemed to whisper dirty promises. I, driven by the blindest desperation of all, wished for health for my youngest daughter, Sophie. She suffered from cruel asthma that left her gasping in the dark, her small chest struggling like a trapped bird. The next day, the asthma vanished. simply evaporated. But a new horror took its place. Sophie stopped breathing during sleep. We'd find her small body rigid in bed, cold as marble, no pulse, not the faintest sign of life. It was like looking at a wax doll. Until someone shook her hard. She'd then wake with a deep, wet, ragged gasp, like someone surfacing from drowning in black water. Her eyes, once bright hazel and full of life, had lost their spark, becoming dull, glazed, like those of a fish dead for hours. One morning, after another traumatic awakening, she whispered, her voice flat and emotionless, that she'd been in a dark, cold place, and that there were things there. Things that looked like us, but weren't. A statement that froze my blood. Then the manifestations began. The first night brought a sound. A persistent, insistent scratching against the back kitchen door. A sound that rasped the nerves, slow and methodical. I thought it was some animal, a stray dog or maybe a raccoon. Flicking on the weak porch light, I saw and standing in the darkness, just beyond the circle of yellow light. But it wasn't my Anne. The posture was wrong, too stiff, like an unhinged mannequin. The face, however, was hers. Every detail was present, down to the small crescent-shaped scar above her upper lip, a memento from a childhood fall. But the skin had a grayish cast, the texture of damp clay. And the eyes. The eyes were the negation of light. Deep, absolute black holes that reflected not a flicker of the bulb. It smiled. A wide, forced smile that stretched the skin unnaturally, revealing a row of pointed yellowish teeth that didn't belong to my wife. She, or the thing wearing her shape, stood there, motionless, that icy smile fixed on me, the black eyes sucking away what courage I had left. When I let out a hoarse shout of pure terror, the figure didn't flee. It simply dissolved backward, into the dense darkness of the yard, like smoke being sucked in by an invisible current. The nights that followed turned our house into a stage for nightmares. The figure wearing Luke's face appeared inside my bedroom, leaning against the wall opposite my bed. Watching. Its body didn't move with my son's teenage looseness, but with a mechanical rigidity, each motion accompanied by a dry snap, like branches breaking under immense weight. The false little Sophie was the most insidious manifestation. It tapped on the window pane of the room where the real Sophie cowered, terrified. Small taps. Rhythmic. Relentless. A constant pattern echoing through the silent house, always accompanied by that same exaggerated empty smile, visible even through the grimy glass. My real daughter wept silently, burying her face in the pillow, murmuring that the other her wanted to be whole, wanted to take her place. We tried to seal the source. We dumped bag after bag of quickset concrete down the well, threw in stones, rubble, everything we had. It was exhausting, sweaty work done under a sun that seemed to mock our effort. The next morning, the well was open, clean, pristine, as if nothing, absolutely nothing, had been thrown inside. The earth around it was smooth, unmarked by our struggle. The well breathed. And the smell, that stench of wet earth and deep decay, became a constant presence. It saturated the walls, our clothes, the food, the very air we tried to breathe. It was the well's breath, blowing over us. And now, listener, as I tell you this story, pause. Take a deep breath. And listen. Listen carefully to the sounds around you. Because back then, it was a small noise out of place, an almost inaudible dragging sound in the dark hallway that alerted us to the true nature of the danger. I realized, with ice forming in my gut, that the entities emerging from the well weren't just copying our forms. They were learning, observing. The figure wearing its face tried one night to touch Luke's hair as he passed, but its fingers, thin and ending in black points sharp like hawk talons, scratched his nape, leaving a shallow red mark that didn't bleed but burned like dry ice. The voice of the Sophie figure, when it tried to mimic my daughter, wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a distortion, words pronounced backward, laced with an underlying noise like the grating of giant crickets, a corrupted recording from a nightmare. And they were gaining substance, solidity. With each manifestation, their physical presence felt more tangible, more dense. The last time the Luke figure appeared, it didn't stay still. It advanced. Its movements were jerky, disjointed, but purposeful. And it managed to turn the kitchen doorknob. The door opened a few inches before I, frantic, slammed my weight against it, locking it again. But in the crack, I felt it. Felt the air that came with it. A cold, damp wind, carrying the unmistakable, nauseating smell of the well's bottom. It was the breath of the abyss, invading our home. Now, we're cornered. The attic is our last fortress, a low, stifling space full of cobwebs and the musty smell of old timber. And holds Sophie against her chest. Sophie doesn't cry anymore, doesn't speak. She only breathes, each inhalation a conscious effort, slow, deliberate, as if preparing for that final moment when air would simply refuse to enter. Her glazed eyes contemplate a void only she can see. Luke is beside me. He's no longer the carefree teenager. His face is a mask of terror aged prematurely. He grips an old scythe, the blade rusted and dull, but it's the only length of metal we could find. His hands shake, but his gaze is fixed on the attic hatch, the only point of entry. Down below, we hear them. The footsteps. They aren't just dragging anymore. They're purposeful, heavy. 3 distinct sets of footsteps, echoing on the floorboards below, a cavernous sound vibrating in the beams beneath our feet. Thud, thud, thud. A slow, inescapable rhythm, ascending each step of the stairs leading up to us. They know where we are. Know we have nowhere left to run. The voices begin, not shouts. Whispers that climb the walls, seep through the floor cracks, echo inside the very skull. They call for me, for Edward, in Anne's voice, but distorted, elongated, as if 1,000 insects were trying to form human words inside a wet leather sack. They ask Luke if he's hungry, using his own voice, but punctuated by dry clicks and the sound of things dragging through mud. The voice trying to mimic Sophie is the one that shatters what's left of sanity. A childish whisper, but empty, without warmth, without life, insisting on being let in, complaining of the cold outside, a monotonous repetition that scrapes the mind like a dull knife. The iron latch on the attic hatch turns. Slowly, with a prolonged high-pitched shriek of metal on metal, a sound that feels like tearing the air itself. I have no more wishes. No hope remains. Only fear. A physical, palpable fear, as dense as the darkness pooling in that well shaft. It fills my lungs, weighs down my limbs, whispers promises of ending in my ears. The thuds against the attic's thin wooden door begin. Gentle at first, like requests. But each one that follows is harder, more violent, more impatient than the last. The old wood groans, splinters under the impact. They won't stop. They want in. They want what is ours. They want to be us. And by the way the door shudders, yielding with each blow, I know it won't hold. The smell is unbearable now. Wet grave dirt, putrid flesh, and a necrotic sweetness that makes the eyes burn. They are here, not just down below. The smell is here, in this cramped space. The darkness in the far corner seems thicker, more aware. And the footsteps have stopped right outside the door. A sudden silence, more terrifying than any thud. The air is still, heavy, charged with malignant expectation. They are here. They are always here. And the door begins to buckle. Grain should be silent. That was the only certainty I had when I took the job watching the silos at Henderson Farms. outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Now, as I write this with hands still shaking, I know grain speaks. It whispers, moans, promises, and worse, it remembers. My name is Anthony, and if you're listening to this through headphones, in a safe room, I suggest you pause for a second and listen to the silence around you. Because silence can be a blessing, or just the prelude to something that shouldn't make a sound. The farm was massive, owned by Mr. Henderson, a man more interested in soybean export figures than the tired bones keeping his operation running. My world was the 8 concrete silos, gray towers cutting into the Iowa sky like vertical tombs. Each held mountains of grain, a constant, mute pressure. My job was simple. Monitor temperature and humidity readings on the ancient panels inside my watch shack, a rotten wooden structure leaning against silo number 4. Monotonous routine, only broken by the distant rumble of a tractor or the occasional bark of a guard dog. Until the whispers began. It started in Silo 3. A low sound, almost subaquatic, seeping through the concrete and the rusted steel access door. Not rats. I've worked grain all my life. I know the sound of rodents. This was different. Fragments of voice, like someone talking with a mouth full of dirt or grain. Indistinct words, but charged with violent emotion. Sometimes a deep moan that chilled my spine, sometimes a hoarse threat that sent cold sweat down my back. Help was the most common, a drawn-out plea echoing in my mind hours later. Leave was the other, a guttural warning, full of an ancient-seeming hatred. I checked the panels. Temperature normal. Humidity normal. Nothing justified those sounds. I ignored it, blamed it on strange wind in the ventilation pipes. My own loneliness since Marissa left, taking little Laura. I ignored it until the day the sensors went mad. It was Silo 7. The digital thermometer, always reliable, jumped from 65 degrees Fahrenheit to 107 degrees Fahrenheit in less than a minute. The humidity gauge, measured in percentage, spiked to 99%, then plummeted to 0%. All while I watched, frozen. Impossible. Basic physics screamed it was impossible. When the numbers snapped back to normal as abruptly as they'd changed, they left behind a smell. A sickly sweet, rotten odor, like overripe corn mixed with roadkill left in the sun. And the whispers in Silo 3 intensified, like a hoarse, wet chuckle. I told Mr. Henderson. He laughed, a sound like dry twigs snapping, and called me a drunk. Grain don't talk, Anthony. Old sensor gives bad readings. Change the batteries. The humiliation burned, but the fear was greater. I wasn't drunk. I was sober. And something was deeply wrong inside those concrete towers. That's when the formations started. Faces. I'd see them in glimpses, when I turned my back to check a panel and quickly looked through the small inspection window atop each silo at the grain surface. They weren't shadows or tricks of light. They were defined faces, sculpted into the very mass of soybeans or corn. Terrified faces. Mouths gaping in silent screams, eyes wide with a palpable panic. They always vanished when I stared directly, as if the grain rearranged itself in a blink. But the image burned onto my retinas, my mind. The face of an old man, deep grooves of despair. A young woman, hair suggested by darker grains, eyes empty. The worst was seeing a face vaguely resembling Laura, my daughter, gone 5 years under circumstances I never understood. That broke something inside me. I started avoiding the inspection windows. But the whispers wouldn't let me forget. They spread. From Silo 3 to 5, then to 1 and 2. A symphony of torment. Voices overlapped, whispers of men, women, even children, all trapped in the dark dampness of the grain. Cold. Dark. Hurts. He comes. Who was he? The fear, once a shadow, became a physical presence, a weight on my chest making it hard to breathe. I slept in the shack, or tried. The whispers permeated my dreams, turning them into nightmares where I sank in a sea of grain shifting like quicksand, faces emerging to pull me under, toothless mouths whispering promises of eternal company. I'd wake gasping, the sweet rotten smell saturating the air, even with all windows closed. The sensors continued their macabre dance, showing impossible numbers defying reality. I told Mr. Henderson again, showed him the printed anomaly logs. He looked at me with disdain, but I saw a flicker of doubt, of primal fear, in his small eyes. "Do one last round. If it don't stop, we'll see." It was a crumb of hope. It was on that last round that I broke. Silo 3 was particularly agitated, the whispers a low, constant roar. I climbed the icy metal ladder to the top platform, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The air was still, thick, heavy with that smell of vegetal death. I looked through the inspection window. The grain surface was calm, flat. I breathed a sigh of relief for a moment. That's when I noticed. It wasn't flat. It formed a pattern. A complex, sinuous pattern that seemed to pulse faintly under my weak flashlight beam. Not faces. Something bigger. Like veins, or black roots, spreading across the entire surface, converging towards the center. And at the center, the grain had sunk, forming a depression. A depression that looked like a mouth. A gaping mouth, deep, dark as the void. And from it, no more whispers came. Came a voice. Clear, icy, sharp as a knife in the night's silence. A voice not composed of multiple torments, but a single entity, deep, vibrating with an ancient, rancorous power. And here, listener, do yourself a favor. Pause this audio. Yes, right now. And listen. Listen carefully to your surroundings. Because at that moment, before the voice spoke, there was a silence. A silence unlike any other. A silence intensely watchful, as if the very air was holding its breath. A silence that precedes the inevitable. Did you feel something like that just now? A chill, a sense of being watched? Maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe it's the same silence I felt. Keep listening if you have the courage. The voice came from that dark grain mouth. Anthony, my name. Spoken not as a call, but as a statement, a sentence. Tired. The word echoed inside the silo, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Hungry. The depression in the grain surface deepened, like a hole sucking in the surrounding matter. The grains around the black veins began to move, flowing slowly, almost liquid, towards the center. We remember. The voice was hypnotic, terrifying. Remember them all. The woman who wept. The old man who fought. The girl. Laura. Hearing her name, from that grain mouth, was a knife to the gut. She screamed. Like you will scream. The grains around the mouth began to rise, forming crude, tentacle-like contours, shapeless arms stretching towards me, even though the steel window separated us. The smell became unbearable, a mix of rotten compost and scorched sugar. The control panel in my shack, down below, started beeping frantically, all alarm lights flashing in mad unison. The final utterance was a whisper that pierced the concrete and steel, entering directly into my mind, an intimate and profane invasion. Open and rest. I don't remember climbing down. I remember running through the dark fields, a scream trapped in my throat, the silo alarms wailing like demonic laughter behind me. The guard dogs howled, didn't bark, howled with a primordial terror. I reached the highway, filthy, soaked in cold sweat, and didn't stop running until I saw the first town lights. Mr. Henderson found me hours later, curled up by the feed store door, unable to form coherent words. He went to the farm with 2 foremen. They came back white, silent. One never spoke again. The silos were condemned, sealed with concrete and steel, like they held a plague. Maybe they do. Now, I work at a gas station off the interstate, far from Cedar Rapids. But the smell of grain, any grain, even fresh coffee, makes me break out in a cold sweat. And at night, when silence falls, I catch myself listening intently. Because silence is never empty. It's the stage. And sometimes, right at the edge of hearing, almost a hum in my blood, I swear I hear it. A whisper. A single whisper, coming from very far away, or very close, impossible to tell. Saying a name. Not mine. This time. But the whisper is patient. It knows there are many silos in the world. Many dark, full places. And it remembers. It always remembers. Grain never forgets. It just waits. And as you hear my voice now, in the comfort of your space, remember that silence I asked you to notice. Is it still there? Or has something else filled it? Something whispering ancient promises at the edges of your perception? Close your eyes and listen. Just listen. They might be closer than you think.